What the Cobra King street gang didn't know when they cornered waitress Sarah Jensen at the back of Bluebird Diner was that the single mother balancing plates for minimum wage had spent 8 years as a Combat Arms Instructor with Marine Force Recon. Her manager had already noticed her breathing pattern shift as muscle memory from 3 combat tours took over. The morning rush at Cooper's Diner moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine as Sarah Jensen navigated between tables, coffee pot in one hand, order pad in the other. To the regular customers, she was just another single mom working double shifts to make ends meet. None of them noticed how her eyes regularly swept the entrance, how she positioned herself to maintain sightlines to all access points, or how she could recall the exact orders of 16 different customers without writing a single note. "Order up, Sarah," Mike called from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates onto the service counter. Sarah maintained her situational awareness as she collected the meals, her movement economy nothing short of professional. Table 7's Denver omelet with hash browns. Table 3's pancake special. She delivered each with practiced efficiency, her smile never reaching her eyes as they continued their systematic scan of the diner's interior. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked the businessman at table 3, noting the expensive watch, the concealed phone conversation he just ended, and the slight bulge at his ankle that suggested a concealed holster. "Probably law enforcement. Off duty. Not a threat. Just a check when you're ready," he replied, barely looking up from his newspaper. Sarah nodded, already moving to her next task. 6 hours into her shift, and she still had another 4 to go before picking up Emma from after-school program. The familiar weight of the locket around her neck, containing her daughter's photo, provided the motivation she needed to keep pushing through. The bell above the diner's door chimed at 10:37, drawing Sarah's immediate attention. 3 men entered, their casual demeanor contrasting with the measured way they surveyed the room. The lead figure, approximately 6 feet 2 inches, athletic build, facial scar running along the right jaw, chose a booth with clear sightlines to both the entrance and the kitchen. Classic tactical positioning. His companions flanked him, one watching the door, the other studying the staff. Sarah recognized the behavior pattern immediately. Not law enforcement. Not military. The subtle communication, territorial assessment, civilian clothing that nevertheless accommodated concealed weapons. All indicators she'd cataloged hundreds of times during her previous life. "New customers in your section, Sarah." Gloria, the 60-something hostess, announced unnecessarily. "Got it," Sarah responded, her voice neutral as she collected 3 menus. Her approach was measured, deliberate, revealing nothing of her internal threat assessment. Lead subject, right-handed based on watch position, likely carrying at his back from the way he adjusted when sitting. Second subject, nervous tick in left eye, constantly scanning, lookout behavior. Third subject, largest of the group, hands scarred from fighting, classic enforcer. "Welcome to Cooper's," she said, placing menus before them with practiced precision. "Coffee to start?" The lead man looked up, his assessment of her both obvious and flawed. He saw the uniform, the name tag, the tired eyes of a middle-aged waitress. He completely missed the calluses on her hands, the perfect balance in her stance, and the strategic way she positioned herself at the table. Close enough for service, far enough for reaction time. "Coffee black," he replied, eyes lingering on her just a moment too long. "Quiet place you've got here." "Most mornings," Sarah acknowledged, pouring coffee with a steady hand, noting how the third man scanned the register area, mentally calculating angles and timing. "Specials are on the front page. I'll give you a minute to decide." As she stepped away, her mind automatically archived details. 3 subjects, likely armed, assessing the location rather than focusing on food. Classic pre-operational surveillance. This wasn't their first visit to the neighborhood. Their comfort level suggested prior reconnaissance. She'd seen the same sedan parked across the street twice this week, occupants observing local businesses. At the counter, Denny Cooper, owner of the diner for 27 years, followed her gaze. "Problem with the new customers?" he asked quietly, wiping down the already clean surface. "Not yet," Sarah answered, loading her tray with condiments that needed refilling. A task that would allow her to maintain observation while appearing occupied. "You've got that look again," Denny noted, his voice dropping further. "The one that says you're seeing things the rest of us don't." Sarah shrugged slightly. "Just being careful." The tall one with the scar visited Marco's grocery yesterday. Marco didn't look happy afterward. Denny's expression tightened. Third business this week. First the dry cleaner, then the pharmacy. Rumor is they're offering protection for a reasonable fee. Sarah nodded, mentally filing this confirmation of her assessment. I'll keep an eye on them. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a specific pattern she'd programmed for Emma's school. 2 short, 1 long. Not an emergency. Just a reminder. Career day tomorrow. Emma had asked again last night if Sarah would come speak to her class. Mom, you never talk about your work before the diner, Emma had said, dark eyes serious in her 12-year-old face. The other kids have parents who are doctors and police officers and stuff. Sarah had gently redirected the conversation, the familiar weight of secrets and safety protocols making her chest tight. How do you explain to a child that mother's previous occupation involved specialized threat neutralization in combat zones? That the medals locked in the safe deposit box came with classified citations? The 3 men were laughing now, though their eyes remained cold, calculating. The leader made a point of examining every staff member, every exit. When his gaze returned to Sarah, she maintained her professional demeanor while mentally noting his increasingly obvious interest. Need a refill over there? She called to Mrs. Peterson at table 5, deliberately moving away from the new arrivals, establishing an unconcerned pattern of behavior. Always, dear, the elderly woman replied with a smile. And maybe tell me who those new fellows are? Don't recognize them. Just passing through, I imagine, Sarah replied, though she knew better. These men weren't passing through. They were establishing territory. The diner represented something to them. Information hub, centralized location, possibly legitimate business front. As she refilled Mrs. Peterson's cup, Sarah's mind quickly ran through contingency plans. Emma's emergency bag was packed and ready at home. Their go identifications were current. The storage unit in the next county contained everything they'd need if relocation became necessary. But Emma had friends here. A good school. A stable environment for the first time in years. Sarah had promised her daughter they wouldn't run again unless absolutely necessary. The lead man raised his hand, signaling for service. Sarah approached, coffee pot ready. You been working here long? He asked as she topped off his cup. Long enough, she answered, maintaining the expected waitress persona. Friendly but not engaging, busy but not dismissive. Neighborhood seems nice, he continued, eyes assessing her reaction. Shame if anything happened to change that. Old training kicked in automatically. Sarah's face revealed nothing while her mind calculated. Direct implied threat. Testing response. Gauging resistance. We like it quiet, she replied, deliberately misunderstanding. Ready to order? The man smiled, a predator's expression that never touched his eyes. Not just yet. We're still getting a feel for the place. Sarah nodded and moved away, her posture revealing nothing of her internal alert status. As she returned to the counter, she caught Denny's worried expression. That guy just asked Marco for $200 a week, he whispered. Said accidents happen to businesses that don't have proper protection. Sarah placed the coffee pot on its warmer. Decision already made. She'd maintained her cover for 3 years in this town, building a normal life for Emma. But normal didn't mean defenseless. Normal didn't mean standing by while predators established hunting grounds. I'll handle my tables, Denny, she said quietly. Just like always. The morning sun cast long shadows through Cooper's front windows as Sarah continued her shift, invisibly watching the watchers. To everyone present, she remained simply a waitress, a single mother working double shifts to make ends meet. None of them noticed how her eyes catalogued every movement, how her mind assessed every threat, or how her body remained ready despite appearing relaxed. None of them recognized the subtle signs of a predator recognizing other predators. And that was exactly how Sarah Jensen, formerly Staff Sergeant Jensen, Military Police Special Response Team, preferred it. At least for now. The morning rush at Mabel's diner had finally subsided, leaving behind the lingering scent of bacon and coffee. Sarah Jensen wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her movements economical, wasting no motion, a habit from another life. Through the front windows, she tracked a black SUV making its third pass of the morning, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. Not local. Not tourists. Her internal threat assessment ticked upward. Order up, Sarah. Hank called from the kitchen. Sarah maintained her professional smile as she collected the plates, but her eyes never stopped scanning. Table 4 needed coffee. The elderly couple by the window was ready for their check. The man in the booth near the door, mid-40s, expensive watch, constantly checking his phone, had been nursing the same cup of coffee for 45 minutes. Surveillance. Amateur, but purposeful. "Here you go, Mr. Peterson," she said, setting down the farmer's breakfast special. "Can I get you anything else?" "This is perfect, Sarah. How's that little girl of yours doing in the science fair?" Emma took second place. "She's already planning next year's project." Sarah's voice carried warmth, but her peripheral vision caught the front door opening. 3 men entered. Muscular builds. Tactical positioning as they took separate tables with overlapping fields of view. The leader, buzz cut, jagged scar on right forearm, approximately 6 feet 2 inches, claimed the corner booth with sightlines to both exits. Mabel, the 60-something owner, stiffened behind the register. "I've got them," Sarah whispered as she passed, noting how Mabel's normally cheerful demeanor had vanished. Sarah approached the corner booth, order pad ready, nothing in her stance betraying the subtle shift in her awareness. Her weight balanced evenly on both feet. Clear path to the kitchen knife block. 7 customers in the diner. 4 potential exit routes. "Coffee to start, gentlemen?" Her tone remained perfectly neutral. The leader glanced up, dismissive at first, then his gaze sharpened. His eyes tracked her face, her stance. Sarah recognized the assessment. She'd done the same countless times in Kandahar. "Coffee. Black." His companions ordered the same. Sarah moved to the coffee station, maintaining sightlines on all 3 men through the angled mirror behind the counter. Another modification she'd quietly suggested to Mabel 3 months after starting work. From this position, she could monitor the entire diner without appearing to pay special attention. "They're back," Mabel whispered, hands trembling slightly as she arranged clean mugs. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah kept her voice low, steady. 3 weeks. They started with Joe's pharmacy, then the hardware store. Last week they visited us for the first time. Mabel's voice cracked. "They call it community support fees. $200 a week to start." Sarah processed this information while pouring coffee with steady hands. Protection racket. Organized. Systematic. Not the random criminal activity that occasionally passed through their small town. "Did you call Sheriff Reynolds?" Mike came by, took a report. Said without evidence of actual threats, there's not much he can do. Mabel's gaze darted toward the men. "And nobody wants to be the one to testify." Sarah returned to the table, setting down 3 black coffees with professional precision. The leader was watching her with more interest now. "What's good here, waitress?" Something in his tone set off Sarah's internal alarms. Not just a question about food. "Everything's good. The meatloaf's today's special." Her response was pleasant but offered nothing personal. "Meatloaf it is." He smiled without warmth. "I'm Vincent. My associates and I are new business consultants in town. We've been helping local establishments with security concerns." Sarah nodded professionally. "I'll put your orders in." As she turned, Vincent spoke again. "You seem different from the usual small-town waitress. More aware." Sarah maintained her cover. "Been doing this job 15 years. You notice things." She felt his eyes tracking her as she moved away. He'd spotted something in her behavior. A professional recognizing another professional. Sarah mentally reviewed her movements, identified the unconscious scan of exits she'd performed. Too ingrained to fully suppress. In the kitchen, she punched in the order while Hank grilled burgers. "Those the guys that scared Mabel last week?" he asked quietly. Sarah nodded. "Keep your head down, Hank." When she returned to the dining room, Vincent was at the register with Mabel. The older woman's face had gone pale. Sarah noted the tremor in Mabel's left hand as she opened the register, the slight shake of her head when she saw Sarah approaching. "Everything all right?" Sarah asked, positioning herself within intervention distance. Vincent turned, assessing her anew. "Just discussing business with the owner. Your meatloaf coming soon." 10 minutes. Sarah maintained steady eye contact, letting him see nothing but professional waitress courtesy. Vincent returned to his table. Sarah leaned close to Mabel. 200, she whispered. Mabel nodded. Up to 300 now. Said rates increase for difficult clients. Sarah's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her gaze tracked Vincent's crew, cataloging details. The bulge under the second man's jacket, shoulder holster, right side. The third man's hands, scarred knuckles, fighting experience. Vincent himself, the way he carried himself suggested military or law enforcement background. Dishonorable discharge or corrupt cop, now using his training on the other side. When Sarah delivered their food, Vincent smiled again. You run this place long enough, you might have to consider our services yourself someday. I just work here, Sarah replied. Anything else I can get you, gentlemen? The rest of their meal passed without incident. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, but her mind was mapping patterns, assessing threats, planning contingencies. When Vincent paid the bill, he left a $50 tip. For your excellent service, he said, holding her gaze a beat too long. We'll be seeing more of each other. After they left, Mabel collapsed onto a stool, hands shaking as she counted out bills from the register. I can't keep doing this, Sarah. But I can't lose this place either. It's all I have since Frank passed. Sarah watched the black SUV pull away, memorizing the license plate. How many other businesses are they hitting? At least 6 that I know of. Mabel's voice dropped. Joe at the pharmacy had his windows broken when he tried to negotiate. Sarah's expression remained calm, but internally her tactical assessment had shifted. This wasn't random. This was organized criminal activity establishing territory. She'd seen similar patterns overseas when insurgent groups moved into new areas. First came the requests, then demands, then examples made of those who resisted. I need to pick up Emma early today, Sarah said. Doctor's appointment. Mabel nodded, not questioning the sudden schedule change. Sarah clocked out, changing from her waitress uniform in the back room. As she pulled on her jacket, her fingers brushed against the concealed pocket where she kept her military ID, a habit she hadn't broken in the 5 years since discharge. Outside, Sarah took an indirect route home, employing counter-surveillance techniques that had once been second nature. 3 random turns. Double back past the hardware store. Confirmation. No tail. Her apartment was a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet complex, chosen specifically for its multiple exit routes and defensible position habits from her former life she'd never fully abandoned. Tonight, she would need to have a conversation with Emma about contingency plans. And then she would need to gather intelligence. If Vincent and his crew were systematically targeting local businesses, they weren't just passing through. They were setting up operations. And Sarah Jensen, former military police with 2 combat tours in Afghanistan, had just been added to their list of potential problems. The morning rush at Dolly's diner had finally settled when Sarah Jensen noticed them again. 3 men in dark jackets, the same ones who'd been watching the place for the past week. They entered with calculated confidence, scanning the room with practiced eyes before settling into booth 7. Sarah's hands remained steady as she poured coffee for Mr. Peterson at the counter, but her senses had shifted to high alert. Warm you up, Edna? She asked the elderly woman in booth 3, maintaining her friendly waitress smile while tracking the men in her peripheral vision. Sarah had positioned herself perfectly, back to the wall, clear sight lines to all entrances, maximum situational awareness. Old habits from her military days that never quite faded. Those boys trouble? Edna whispered, her weathered hands trembling slightly around her teacup. The elderly woman had been coming to Dolly's every Tuesday for 15 years, long before Sarah had started working there. Nothing I can't handle, Sarah assured her, voice calm and measured. Finish your breakfast in peace. The tallest of the men, mid-30s, shaved head, small scar across his left eyebrow, military-style bootlaces, signaled for service. Sarah approached their table with professional efficiency, coffee pot in hand. Coffee, gentlemen? Her voice betrayed nothing, but she'd already catalogued multiple details. The bulge of a concealed weapon under the jacket of the man on the left, the nervous energy of the youngest one, the way the leader positioned himself with clear lines of sight to all exits. Sure thing, sweetheart, the leader replied, smirking as he deliberately examined her name tag, then lowered his gaze. Sarah, is it? Nice place you've got here. Sarah poured coffee with perfect steadiness. What can I get you today? She maintained eye contact, neither challenging nor submissive. The stance of someone who understood threat assessment. "We're actually here to speak with Ray," he said, referring to the diner's owner. "Business proposition. He around?"
"Mr. Gaines is handling deliveries," Sarah responded evenly.
"I can take a message." The youngest man snickered. "Tell him Marco stopped by to collect. He'll understand." "I see." Sarah placed menus on the table. "I'll let him know. In the meantime, our special today is the Western omelet." Her tone remained professional, but something in her posture had subtly shifted.
The leader noticed, his eyes narrowing slightly.
"Not hungry," Marco stated flatly.
"Just coffee."
"We'll wait." Sarah nodded and turned to check on her other tables.
She felt their eyes on her back but didn't hurry her movements.
10 steps to the counter, she calculated the distance to the kitchen door, the time it would take to reach the baseball bat Ray kept behind the register. The casual assessment of tactical options was automatic, ingrained from years of training.
The diner's bell chimed as Edna's husband Howard entered, the 83-year-old moving slowly with his walker. Sarah moved to help him to his wife's booth, but Marco's lieutenant, the one with the concealed weapon, deliberately stood up, blocking Howard's path.
"Excuse me," Howard said politely, attempting to maneuver around him. "Place is getting crowded," the man replied, not moving. "Maybe time for the senior special at the retirement home instead." His companions chuckled. Sarah set down her coffee pot with deliberate care. The small sound it made against the counter registered clearly in the suddenly silent diner. Every customer tensed, recognizing the shift in atmosphere. "Sir," Sarah addressed the standing man, her voice carrying a new tone, commanding, precise. "Please step aside and allow Mr. Pierce to pass." The man turned, amused by her intervention. "Or what, waitress? You gonna?" Sarah moved into his personal space with such fluid precision that he instinctively stepped back. She hadn't touched him, hadn't raised her voice, but something in her positioning, her balance, the absolute control in her movement, triggered a primal warning signal. "Mr. Pierce is a respected regular," she stated, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations.
"He enjoys the Western omelet every Tuesday with his wife."
"I'd hate for him to miss that tradition today."
She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes.
The man registered something in her stance that made him reassess. His hand had instinctively moved toward his concealed weapon, but Sarah's subtle weight shift told him she'd noticed, and was prepared for it. Marco studied her with new interest. "Stand down, Joey," he ordered his lieutenant. "Let the old-timer through." He never took his eyes off Sarah. "Didn't mean any disrespect to your customers." Sarah helped Howard to his seat, her movements relaxed again, but everyone in the diner had witnessed the transformation, however brief, from waitress to something else entirely. "Everything okay here?" Ray Gaines appeared from the back, wiping his hands on a dish towel. The 50-something owner had the solid build of a former football player gone soft with age. His eyes darted nervously between Sarah and the three men. "Ray!" Marco's false enthusiasm filled the diner. "Just the man we came to see. Time for our weekly chat about business opportunities." Ray's shoulders slumped slightly. "Sarah, can you handle things out here for a minute?" "Of course, Mr. Gaines." Sarah's voice had returned to its waitress pleasantness, but her eyes communicated something else to her boss. A reassurance. A readiness.
As Ray led the men to his small office, Sarah returned to her duties, feeling the curious eyes of the customers.
She refilled coffees, delivered orders, maintained the professional demeanor of a dedicated server. But now there was something else visible to those watching closely, a controlled alertness, an economy of movement, an awareness of everything happening around her. 15 minutes later, Marco and his men emerged from the office. Ray followed, his face pale but composed. Sarah noticed the slight tremor in his right hand. The envelope of cash he'd handed over had been substantial. Marco paused at the counter where Sarah was refilling salt shakers.
"See you next week, Sarah," he said, emphasizing her name.
"Always good to support local businesses." The threat was thinly veiled. Sarah met his gaze directly. "Have a nice day, gentlemen."
Her response was polite, but something in her eyes made Marco hesitate fractionally before nodding and leading his men out. After they left, The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Ray approached Sarah at the counter, his voice low. "You shouldn't have intervened with Howard, Sarah. Those aren't men you want to notice you." "Too late for that," she replied, methodically continuing her work. "They've been watching the place for days. Cataloging staff, customers, patterns." Ray stared at her. "How would you know that?" Sarah simply continued arranging salt shakers, her movements efficient. "They'll be back with larger demands next time." "That's how extortion works." "And we'll pay," Ray insisted, fear evident in his voice. "That's how staying in business works in this neighborhood now." "Is that what happened to Marino's grocery?" Sarah asked. The family-owned store 2 blocks down had closed abruptly last month. Ray nodded grimly. "Couldn't keep up with the protection fees." "Look, Sarah, I know you need this job for you and Emma. Just serve the food. Keep your head down. Please." Sarah finished the salt shakers and wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Gaines." Her voice was professional, reassuring. But as Ray walked away, Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, watching Marco and his men climb into a black Escalade across the street. Her expression shifted subtly, revealing something her employer and customers had never seen. The focused calculation of someone assessing threats, cataloging weaknesses, and formulating contingencies. In booth 3, Howard reached for Edna's hand. "That girl," he whispered. "There's something about her." Edna nodded, watching Sarah return to work with the same efficient movements she displayed every day for the past 3 years. "Always thought so. Way she carries herself. My brother was Marines, had the same look in his eyes sometimes." "Think those fellas know what they're poking?" Howard asked. Edna sipped her tea, observing Sarah's calm, controlled movements as she navigated the diner with tactical precision disguised as waitress efficiency. "No," she said finally. "But I suspect they're going to find out." Outside, the black Escalade pulled away from the curb. Inside, Sarah Jensen continued her shift, mind already mapping out angles of approach, potential threats, and defensive options for the diner's layout. The confrontation had been minor, but she recognized an escalation pattern when she saw one. They would be back, with more men and greater demands. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from her daughter's school. Nothing urgent, just a reminder about tomorrow's science project. Sarah's thoughts shifted momentarily to the apartment she shared with 12-year-old Emma, to the locked trunk beneath her bed containing remnants of a life her daughter knew nothing about. Sarah poured coffee for a new customer, her smile professional and warm. But behind her eyes, calculations continued, tactical assessments, security weaknesses, resource evaluation. The skills that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments were awakening again, sharpening with each passing moment. Marco and his men would return, expecting to find a waitress and a frightened diner owner. They would find something else entirely. Emma Jensen's school project on hometown heroes had led her to the dusty storage boxes in their apartment's small closet. "Mom, do we have any pictures of Grandpa in his uniform?" she called out. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's lunches. "Second box, blue lid," she answered, her voice carefully neutral. But it wasn't her father's military memorabilia that Emma found. Behind the blue-lidded box was another container. Olive green, military issue, with Jensen S. MP 2nd Division stenciled on its side. Emma's fingers hesitated only a moment before lifting the lid. Inside lay a world she'd never known existed. Her mother's world. A combat action badge gleamed atop a carefully folded uniform. Beneath it, commendation letters, deployment orders, and photographs of a younger Sarah, hair regulation short, expression serious, standing with her unit in Afghanistan. And there, in a protective sleeve, a Silver Star citation. "Mom!" Emma's voice was different now, questioning, almost uncertain. The lunch preparation sounds from the kitchen stopped. Sarah Jensen stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. Her posture had changed, straighter, shoulders squared, chin slightly raised, a transformation so subtle most wouldn't notice. But Emma saw it. For the first time, she was seeing her mother as she once was. "I thought we'd have this conversation when you were older," Sarah said quietly, kneeling beside the box. Her fingers traced the edge of the citation with practiced precision. "That was another life. You were a soldier?"
Emma's eyes were wide, processing this revelation about the woman who had always just been Mom. The person who worked double shifts at Harlow's Diner, who checked homework, who made sure they had clean clothes and food in the refrigerator. Military police. 8 years. 2 combat deployments. Sarah's voice carried a tone Emma had never heard. Crisp, professional, carrying natural authority. I specialized in close protection details and threat assessment. The Silver Star citation told part of the story. A convoy ambush, Sarah's quick thinking and disregard for personal safety that saved 17 lives. What it didn't tell was how that day had changed her, how the sounds of gunfire and explosions still sometimes woke her at night. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah carefully replaced the items in the box. Some parts of life are hard to explain, Emma. When I came home, when I had you, I wanted something quieter. Something normal. Emma looked at her mother with new eyes. Is that why you always sit facing the door at restaurants? Why you check the locks 3 times every night? Sarah smiled slightly. Old habits. When you've lived in certain environments, awareness becomes automatic. She paused, considering how much to share. It's like always knowing where the exits are. The sound of a car backfiring in the street made Sarah's head turn sharply, her body shifting instinctively into a protective stance between the noise and her daughter. The movement was fluid, practiced, and over in seconds. But Emma had seen it. Like that, Sarah acknowledged quietly. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah moved silently through her nightly routine. The apartment was small, kitchen and living area combined, 2 tiny bedrooms, a bathroom that barely fit both of them at once. But it was clean, functional, and, most importantly, secure. In her bedroom, Sarah slid open the false bottom of her closet. Unlike the memorabilia Emma had discovered, these items weren't relics of the past. A compact tactical vest, specialized gloves with reinforced knuckles, a military-grade first aid kit, tools of a trade she'd never fully abandoned. Sarah moved through a precise series of exercises. Not just maintenance for a 37-year-old body that had seen combat, but muscle memory that kept skills sharp. Strikes, blocks, takedowns, all executed with controlled power in the limited space between bed and dresser. Her breathing remained measured, even as sweat began to form at her temples. The exercises transitioned into tactical movement patterns, silent approaches, entry positioning, environmental scanning. To anyone watching, it might have seemed excessive for a diner waitress. But Sarah Jensen had learned the hard way that preparation meant survival. A light knock interrupted her. Emma stood in the doorway, eyes wide. You do this every night? She asked. Sarah straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Not every night. 3 times a week. She paused, considering her words carefully. It's like insurance. Hoping never to need it, but maintaining it just in case. Emma nodded slowly. Because of those men at the diner? I've seen how they look at you. Sarah's expression revealed nothing, but her mind calculated quickly. Emma was observant, another trait they shared. There was no point in pretending. Partly, she admitted. Garfield Heights is changing. Those men represent people who think they can take what they want through intimidation. Are we in danger? Emma's question was direct, her voice steadier than most 12-year-olds would manage. Not if I can help it, Sarah replied, authority returning to her voice. Which is why I maintain certain skills. A knock at the apartment door interrupted them. Sarah's demeanor shifted instantly, alert, focused, moving Emma behind her with practiced efficiency. She approached the door at an angle, checking the peephole with calculated caution. Detective Michael Reeves stood in the hallway, his badge visible in his hand. Sarah's posture relaxed marginally, but the alertness remained. Emma, homework. Now, please. The tone brooked no argument. Emma retreated to her room, but left the door cracked. Sarah opened the door, maintaining control of its swing. Detective. It's late for official business. Reeves looked tired, the kind of fatigue that came from too many hours chasing too many problems with too few resources. Not official. Not exactly. He glanced down the hallway. Can I come in? Sarah assessed him quickly. Posture, eye movement, hand positioning. Old habits. She stepped aside. Coffee? She offered, moving to the kitchen area. Already too wired.
He declined, taking the seat that gave him the wall at his back. Another habit Sarah recognized from those who'd seen trouble.
The men at Harlow's, Reeves said without preamble.
They're Kowalski's.
Part of his organization.
Sarah kept her expression neutral as she leaned against the counter.
The name means nothing to me.
Victor Kowalski.
Moved his operation here 6 months ago. Started small, construction kickbacks, some loan sharking. Now he's expanding, putting pressure on local businesses.
Reeves ran a hand through his thinning hair.
Your boss isn't the only one paying for protection. Why tell me this?
Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer.
Reeves met her eyes directly. Because I pulled your file, Jensen. Military police. Combat action badge. Silver Star. 2 deployments to Afghanistan with the 2nd MP specialized training in close protection and threat assessment. He paused. You're not just a waitress.
I am now, Sarah replied evenly.
The way you handled those guys today says otherwise. Reeves leaned forward. Word is, Kowalski's people feel challenged. They don't like that, especially from a woman. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Is this a warning, detective?
Information, he corrected.
Kowalski's organization is expanding aggressively. They've targeted 4 neighborhoods, including this one. They like to make examples of people who resist.
Sarah processed this, her mind automatically mapping threat vectors and vulnerable points.
Her eyes flicked briefly toward Emma's room. I appreciate the information, she said finally. But I'm just trying to raise my daughter and pay rent. That's all.
Reeves stood, fatigue evident in his movements.
Your military record suggests you've never been just anything, Jensen.
He moved toward the door, then paused.
The department stretched thin.
Response times in this neighborhood.
He left the implication hanging.
After Reeves left, Sarah checked the locks. Once, twice, 3 times.
Habit.
She moved to Emma's room, finding her daughter pretending to study.
You heard?
Sarah asked. Emma nodded.
Are they really going to come after you, Mom? Sarah considered her answer carefully. They're trying to scare people, Emma. Fear is a powerful tool. But you're not scared, Emma observed. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. I've learned to use fear differently, to let it sharpen focus rather than cloud judgment. She brushed hair from her daughter's forehead. Tomorrow, I'm going to call Grandma and Grandpa. I think you should stay with them for a little while. Because of those men?
Emma frowned. Because it's smart to remove variables from tactical situations, Sarah replied, then smiled softly at her daughter's expression.
Sorry. Old language. Yes, because of those men. After Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah returned to the living room. Moving silently, she retrieved a small notebook and began documenting descriptions, times, behavioral patterns, vehicle information. She'd been watching Kowalski's men since they first appeared at the diner 3 weeks ago. Sarah Jensen may have left the military, but the training remained. Observation, assessment, preparation. For 8 years, these skills had kept her alive in combat zones. Now, they would protect what mattered most, her daughter and the life they'd built. From her window, Sarah noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. Dark sedan, 2 occupants, engine running despite the late hour. Watching her building. The waitress from Harlow's Diner allowed herself a small, grim smile. Kowalski's men thought they were hunting a single mother, an easy target. They had no idea they were stalking a predator. The smell of fresh coffee filled Sarah's small apartment as dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. She moved with practiced efficiency through her morning routine, body on autopilot while her mind catalogued yesterday's events. The criminal's behavior at the diner had shifted. No longer general intimidation, but focused observation. Their leader, a man the locals called Reyes, had studied her with cold calculation that triggered the same instinct she'd relied on during convoy security in Kandahar. Mom, have you seen my science notebook? Emma called from her bedroom, breaking Sarah's tactical assessment. Check your backpack side pocket, Sarah responded, pouring coffee into her travel mug. Her daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway, notebook in hand, dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Sarah checked her watch. 0630, right on schedule.
"You've got that look again," Emma said, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl.
"What look?" "The one where you're not really here. Like you're somewhere else, watching for something." Sarah forced her features to relax. 12 years old and already reading people like intelligence reports. "Just thinking about work, kiddo. Big breakfast rush today." Emma didn't look convinced but let it drop as they moved through their morning routine. 20 minutes later, Sarah watched her daughter board the school bus from the apartment complex entrance, maintaining visual contact until the bus turned the corner. Only then did she begin her own walk to Maggie's Diner, 5 blocks east. She noticed the silver sedan halfway there, parked across from Henderson's Pharmacy, engine running, 2 occupants. The same vehicle she'd spotted yesterday near the school. Sarah maintained her pace but shifted her route, using the reflection in the hardware store window to confirm the sedan pulling into traffic behind her. Her hand instinctively moved toward her hip where her sidearm would have been during patrols, finding only the empty space beneath her waitress uniform. Sarah's phone vibrated as she approached the diner. A text from an unknown number. "Should have minded your business yesterday." Attached was a photo of Emma boarding the school bus 20 minutes ago. The cold that spread through Sarah's body had nothing to do with the morning chill. She quickly saved the number, took a screenshot, then deleted the message before pushing through the diner's glass door. "You're late, honey," Maggie called from behind the counter. Gray hair piled in its usual messy bun. "Sorry," Sarah responded automatically, scanning the diner's occupants. Regular morning crowd, no unfamiliar faces. She moved behind the counter, tying an apron around her waist while maintaining line of sight to the entrance and all exit points. "You okay?" Maggie asked, lowering her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, already planning her next moves. "Actually, can I use your office phone? My cell's almost dead." In the small back office, Sarah called Emma's school, establishing a new pickup protocol, then Detective Wilson at the precinct, leaving a detailed message about the silver sedan, including plate numbers she'd memorized during her walk. The text message required more consideration. Involving the police officially would escalate matters, potentially triggering immediate retaliation. For now, information gathering remained the priority. Her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders, her body operating on muscle memory while her mind ran threat assessments and defensive calculations. Sarah maintained constant awareness of the diner's entrance, cataloging every customer against her mental database of faces and behaviors. The silver sedan made 3 passes by the diner during her shift, different driver each time, always slowing at the large front windows. "Order up for table 7, cook shouted through the service window, breaking her concentration. Sarah loaded the plates onto her tray with practiced efficiency, navigating through the crowded tables while maintaining situational awareness. Through the front windows, she spotted a black SUV pulling into the lot. Tinted windows, custom wheels, prime cartel showpiece. Reyes emerged from the passenger side, adjusting his designer sunglasses before heading toward the entrance. 2 men flanked him, their jackets tailored to conceal shoulder holsters. "Maggie," Sarah called over her shoulder, voice low and controlled. "Take your break now. Use the back door." The older woman's eyes widened slightly at Sarah's tone, but she recognized the command voice and moved toward the kitchen without question. The bell above the door chimed as Reyes and his men entered, taking the corner booth with clear sightlines to both the entrance and counter. Sarah finished delivering her order before approaching their table, order pad ready, posture neutral but balanced on the balls of her feet. "Welcome to Maggie's. What can I get you?" Reyes smiled, all perfect teeth and cold eyes. "Just coffee for now. We're waiting for someone." His accent was pure local, but his tactical positioning was straight from enforcer training. Back to wall, clear view of exits, men positioned for maximum coverage. 3 coffees coming up, Sarah responded, maintaining eye contact for precisely the right amount of time. Not challenging, not submissive. As she turned, Reyes spoke again. "Nice place. Shame about the vandalism last night." Sarah kept her expression neutral as she turned back. "Vandalism?" Reyes shrugged. "So hard to keep property safe these days. By the way, how's your daughter? Emma, right? Heard she's doing well in science class." The threat hung in the air between them,
But Sarah's expression revealed nothing.
12 years of military discipline had taught her to control her reactions under far worse circumstances than a diner threat. "Your coffee will be right up."
The next hour passed with precise tactical maneuvering, Reyes and his men nursing their coffees, watching her every move, occasionally making calls but never leaving.
Sarah maintained her waitress routine while silently calculating distance to exits, potential impromptu weapons, and defensive positions behind the counter. At 14:30, her phone vibrated with a message from Emma's school, the emergency code phrase they'd established that morning. Her daughter was safely with the office staff, not boarding the bus. One less vulnerability to worry about. At 1500, Sarah's shift ended. She untied her apron in the back room, gathering her personal items while texting her neighbor Mrs. Petrova, retired Army nurse with a concealed carry permit, who confirmed she would escort Emma from school to her apartment and stay with her until Sarah arrived. When Sarah emerged, Reyes and his men were gone, but they'd left something on their table, a $20 tip and a business card with an address. The message was clear: they knew where to find her, and they expected her to know where to find them. Outside, the silver sedan was parked across the street, driver pretending to check his phone. Sarah walked past Maggie's office, dropping the business card on her desk. "Need to leave early today. Family emergency. Everything okay?" Maggie asked, concern evident in her lined face.
"It will be," Sarah replied, already mentally calculating the fastest route home while avoiding potential surveillance. The apartment door showed signs of tampering when she arrived. Subtle marks around the lock that most would miss. Sarah pulled the small canister of pepper spray from her purse. Legal civilian defense, poor substitute for military hardware, but functional. She entered using the breach technique drilled into her during room clearing exercises, sweeping the small space with practiced efficiency. The apartment had been searched professionally. Items moved slightly but returned to approximate positions. Nothing obviously stolen, but the message was unmistakable. They could enter her space at will. On Emma's bed lay her favorite stuffed bear, head severed and reattached with red thread. Cold rage swept through Sarah as she secured the apartment, checking windows and reinforcing the door with a security bar she'd installed when they first moved in. She pulled her go-bag from the hidden compartment beneath the bathroom sink. Cash, spare ID, burner phone, and the few personal defense items she could legally own as a civilian. When Emma arrived with Mrs. Petrova 30 minutes later, Sarah had already packed 2 small suitcases and arranged for them to stay with her former staff sergeant in the next county. As they drove away in her 10-year-old sedan, Sarah watched the rearview mirror with the same vigilance she'd maintained during convoy operations. "Mom, what's happening?" Emma asked, clutching her backpack to her chest, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Just a small problem at the apartment, sweetie. We're going to stay with an old friend for a few days while it gets fixed." Sarah maintained her voice at the calm, measured tone she'd used to brief nervous recruits before their first patrol. "Is this because of those men at the diner? The ones Mrs. Maggie is scared of?" Sarah's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "What makes you ask that? I hear things. People talk at school. They say bad men are making everyone pay for protection." The tactical situation had just changed. Emma was now an informed participant, not just a protected civilian. Sarah had faced this scenario before, when intelligence suddenly shifted, when civilians became part of the operation. "Yes, it's connected to those men," Sarah answered, adjusting her approach.
"But I want you to know something important. This isn't the first difficult situation I've handled, and we're going to be okay." "Because of what you did in the Army?" Emma asked, surprising Sarah with her perception. Sarah checked the rearview mirror again, confirming no tail vehicles, before answering. "Yes, because of what I learned there." Sometimes people think they're the biggest threats around until they meet someone who's faced real dangers. As they crossed the county line, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Wilson. "Check plate. Registered to shell company linked to Reyes organization. Be careful." Sarah glanced at her daughter, who had finally relaxed enough to open a book. The protective anger she felt was familiar. The same focus that had kept her unit alive during ambushes and firefights. Reyes had made a critical tactical error targeting a 12-year-old girl. He thought he was escalating against a waitress, but he just declared war on a combat veteran who had nothing left to lose. For the first time since leaving the military, Sarah embraced the cold, tactical clarity that had once defined her professional life. Reyes and his organization were about to learn a painful lesson about threat assessment and target selection. They had no idea what kind of opponent they had just awakened. The evening rain washed across Millridge's empty streets as Sarah Jensen completed her final security check of her modest two-bedroom apartment. Rain tapping against windows provided rhythm to her methodical movements, checking locks, adjusting makeshift alarms, verifying escape routes. Old habits from her military days that had suddenly become essential again. 3 days since they'd vandalized her car. 2 days since the threatening note had appeared at the diner. 1 day since she'd sent Emma to stay with her parents in Lakewood. Sarah moved to the kitchen table where her phone displayed a text from Emma. "Grandpa taught me chess today. Beat him twice. Miss you, Mom." A rare smile crossed Sarah's face before it hardened again. On the table lay a manila folder record she'd compiled on Mason Harding's crew. Photographs, license plates, patterns of movement, businesses they'd approached. The kind of threat assessment she hadn't conducted since Afghanistan. Her former staff sergeant's words from last night's call still echoed. "These aren't organized professionals, Jensen. They're opportunists with guns. Don't underestimate them, but don't overestimate them either." Sarah checked her watch. 10:47 p.m. According to her observations, Harding's crew made their collections from the corner pub at 11:15 every Thursday. They always parked in the same alley, always followed the same route back to their warehouse headquarters. Predictable. Sloppy. She grabbed her dark blue windbreaker, nothing tactical, nothing that would draw attention, and headed out. No weapon. She didn't need one, and if things went sideways, she couldn't afford the legal complications. The corner pub's neon sign painted weak colors across rain-slick streets as Sarah positioned herself in the recessed doorway of a closed bakery. Perfect angle on the alley, minimal exposure, 3 potential exit routes. The training never really left you. At 11:12, right on schedule, a black SUV pulled into the alley beside the pub. Sarah recognized Harding immediately. Mid-30s, sleeve tattoos, the swagger of someone who'd never faced real consequences. 2 associates flanked him, one carrying what appeared to be a collection bag. They disappeared into the pub's back entrance. Sarah moved silently across the street, positioning herself at the alley's entrance. 7 minutes. That's how long they typically spent inside. At 11:19, the pub's rear door swung open. Sarah could hear Harding's distinctive laugh before she saw him. The sound of a man who thought he owned the world. "Mason Harding," Sarah called, her voice carrying the command presence perfected through years of military police work. "We need to talk." The 3 men froze momentarily before the recognition registered on Harding's face. "Well, look who it is. The waitress with an attitude." His hand drifted toward his waistband. "I wouldn't," Sarah said calmly. "Your reaction time's about half what you'd need." Harding's associates exchanged uncertain glances, noting the complete lack of fear in Sarah's stance. "Got some balls coming here alone," Harding said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Especially after our little warning." Sarah took 3 measured steps forward, closing the distance to 12 feet. "That's why I'm here. To give you your only warning." The shorter associate, Dominic Rivera, according to Sarah's intelligence, snickered. "Lady, you don't know who you're dealing with." Sarah's eyes never left Harding's. Former military police, 720th MP Battalion, 4 tours including Kandahar. Close quarters combat specialist, advanced tactical training, expert marksmanship qualification. Each credential delivered without emotion. But that doesn't matter. What matters is you're going to stay away from Miller's Diner, away from my home, and away from my daughter. Harding's face registered surprise before he forced a laugh. "You think your little service record scares me? We own this neighborhood now." Sarah nodded slightly. "I figured you'd say that." Her movement was so fluid, so unexpected, that Rivera didn't even have time to register what was happening. In one motion, Sarah closed the distance, disabled his wrist with a precision joint manipulation, removed the concealed handgun from his waistband, and stepped back, all while maintaining perfect body control. She ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber with practiced efficiency, and tossed the disabled weapon into a nearby puddle. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. "Like I said, reaction time." Sarah's voice remained calm, conversational almost. "That was just a demonstration." The third man, tall, muscular,
with a neck tattoo, moved toward her.
Sarah pivoted slightly, her stance subtly shifting. One more step and I'll dislocate your shoulder, damage the rotator cuff, approximately 4 months recovery with proper physical therapy. No threat in her tone, just professional assessment. He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Harding's confidence visibly wavered. You made a big mistake tonight. No, Sarah countered. Your mistake was threatening my family. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and held it out. This is a copy. I have the original secured elsewhere. License plates, businesses you've targeted, collection schedules, warehouse location, plus surveillance photos. One more incident, anything, and this goes to Detective Mercer at MPD Organized Crime. Harding didn't take the paper, so Sarah let it fall to the wet pavement between them. You think some paperwork's gonna protect you? Harding snarled, but the uncertainty in his voice was evident. I think you should consider what happens if I stop being reasonable, Sarah replied. Right now, I'm just asking you to leave the diner and my family alone. That's the reasonable approach. And if we don't?
Rivera had recovered enough to find his voice, though he was still nursing his wrist.
Sarah's expression remained unchanged. Then I stop being reasonable. And I start using my training for more than just demonstrations. The rain intensified, drumming against metal dumpsters and washing across the pavement. For several seconds, no one moved. You three against this entire neighborhood.
Those aren't good odds, Mason.
Especially with me in the equation. Sarah maintained eye contact with Harding. Make the smart play here. Sarah took 3 steps backward, maintaining her tactical positioning. This is your only warning. We don't need to have this conversation again. Headlights swept across the alley entrance as a police cruiser rolled past on routine patrol. When the light faded and everyone's vision readjusted, Sarah was gone, disappeared into the rainy night with the same silent efficiency that had characterized her approach. Back in her apartment 20 minutes later, Sarah methodically dried her hair with a towel. Her movements were precise, controlled, betraying none of the adrenaline that had coursed through her system during the confrontation. Her phone buzzed with a text from Joe Miller, the diner's owner. Everything okay? You never miss a shift. Sarah typed back, had something to take care of. We'll explain tomorrow. She moved to the window, scanning the street below with practiced efficiency. No unusual vehicles. No suspicious movement. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the glass. Her phone rang, the secure line she'd maintained since her service days. The display showed Sergeant Taylor. They backed down, her former commanding officer asked without preamble when she answered. For now, Sarah confirmed. But they'll regroup, try to save face. Probably call in resources. You've got the package I sent? Sarah's eyes moved to the locked cabinet in her bedroom. Yes. Hope I don't need it. Your tactical assessment? Old habits resurfaced as Sarah delivered her analysis. They'll either back off completely or escalate significantly. No middle ground. Based on psychological profiling, Harding can't afford to lose status. I'm anticipating escalation within 72 hours. A pause on the line. You're not in Kandahar anymore, Jensen. There are legal considerations. I'm aware of the parameters, Sarah replied, her voice betraying no emotion. Everything stays within civilian legal boundaries. Your daughter. Secure with my parents. Another pause. The Sarah Jensen I knew always had contingency plans. Sarah moved away from the window, checking her makeshift alarm system one more time. Still do. 3 layers deep. Her former commanding officer's chuckle carried through the phone. Those criminals have no idea what they've walked into, do they? For the first time that night, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They will soon enough. After ending the call, Sarah checked her daughter's tracking app one last time, still safely at her parents' house in Lakewood. Then she set about preparing for what would come next. Tonight had been the warning. Professional, controlled by the book. What happened next would depend entirely on how Mason Harding and his crew responded. Sarah Jensen had drawn the line clearly. Now she would prepare for those who might be foolish enough to cross it. The rain continued its steady cadence against the windows as Sarah Jensen, former military police officer with 4 combat tours, began to formulate her defensive strategy for Miller's Diner. Midnight oil burned in Harvey's diner as Sarah wiped down the counters, her movements efficient and purposeful. 3 nights had passed since her warning to the local criminals, and the evening stillness felt too perfect, too orchestrated. The tactical calm before a storm she'd experienced too many times in Kandahar. "You should head home, Frank," she called to the cook who was finishing inventory in the back. "I'll lock up." Frank's weathered face appeared in the service window. "You sure, Sarah? After what happened last week?" "I'm sure." Her eyes automatically scanned the parking lot through the windows. Empty except for her 10-year-old Corolla and Frank's pickup. But the black sedan that had circled the block 3 times in the past hour was conspicuously absent now. "Just following my instincts." Frank hesitated but nodded. Working with Sarah these past 18 months had taught him to trust her instincts, though he now understood they were something far more tactical than that. After Frank left, Sarah continued her closing routine with methodical precision while maintaining her awareness of the environment. Her phone vibrated with a text from Emma. "All good at Grandma's. Love you, Mom." Sarah smiled briefly before returning to her security scan. Something was different tonight. The normal ambient sounds from neighboring businesses had gone quiet. The 24-hour convenience store across the street should have had its usual customer activity. Instead, it stood unnaturally still. She moved to the back office, unlocking the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet where Frank had agreed she could store a small lockbox. Inside was her Glock 19, the same model she'd carried during her military police tours. Sarah checked it with practiced efficiency, magazine seated, round-chambered, safety engaged, before securing it in her waistband to the small of her back, concealed by her loose diner shirt. The sound of tires on wet asphalt drew her attention. Not approaching directly, tactical vehicle deployment, establishing a perimeter. Sarah dimmed the back office light and moved silently to the side window. 3 vehicles, the black sedan from earlier, now accompanied by a dark SUV and a panel van. Professional arrangement, not the random clustering of typical street criminals. Escalation response, Sarah whispered to herself, falling back on her combat terminology. They'd brought in professionals, likely from outside their normal crew. The lieutenant had arrived. Sarah established her tactical position behind the counter, where the reinforced cash register station provided cover while allowing visibility of both entrances. She sent a pre-coded text to Detective Rivera, "Coffee delivery tomorrow morning." Their arranged signal that would bring police presence at dawn, too far away to help now, but ensuring someone would check if things went sideways. The front door rattled, testing, not yet forcing entry. Sarah remained silent, controlling her breathing just as she'd trained her MP unit to do during building clearance operations. "We know you're in there, waitress." The voice carried a professional edge, different from the local criminal's usual bravado. "Time for a business discussion about your future in this neighborhood." Sarah scanned for additional movement. There, shadows passing by the kitchen's rear entrance. They were establishing containment, covering all exits. 4, possibly 5 hostiles. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The sound of breaking glass came from the back door. They were done with subtlety. Sarah pressed the silent alarm Frank had installed last week, then moved to her secondary position behind the stainless steel prep station. Better cover, limited visibility for entering hostiles, multiple improvised weapons within reach. 2 men entered through the kitchen, their movements betraying professional training. Not military precision, but formal tactical experience. Private security backgrounds, Sarah assessed, or perhaps former law enforcement gone bad. One carried a collapsible baton, the other a pistol held low at his side. "Check the office," the armed one directed, his voice hushed but carrying in the silent diner. Sarah controlled her breathing, waiting until the first man passed her position. When he turned toward the office, she moved. 18 months of daily training in her apartment hadn't dulled the combat reflexes developed over 3 tours. She struck with precision, right hand securing the armed man's wrist while her left delivered a throat strike that collapsed him instantly. As he dropped, she obtained control of his weapon, a Sig Sauer P226, quality hardware, and pivoted to face the second hostile. The baton wielder reacted quickly, better trained than she'd expected. His weapon extended with a metallic snap as he advanced. Sarah sidestepped his first swing, analyzing his technique. Former police tactical training, but sloppy execution under pressure. "Stand down," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority that had once directed military convoys through insurgent territory. "You're outmatched." His response was another swing, this one coming closer as he adjusted to her movement patterns. Sarah countered with a direct engagement, blocking the baton arm while driving forward into his center mass. The collision forced him back against the industrial refrigerator, his head connecting with the stainless steel hard enough to disorient him momentarily. Sarah secured the baton with a wrist lock that ended with a distinct snap of breaking bone. The man cried out, collapsing to his knees as she relieved him of both weapon and consciousness with a precision strike. The front door burst open, revealing a tall figure in an expensive leather jacket, different from the tactical clothing of his subordinates. Behind him, two more men established position at the entrance. "Impressive," the man said, his voice carrying the calm confidence of someone used to being in control. "The boys said you had training, but I wanted to see for myself." Sarah maintained her tactical position, the acquired SIG held at low ready, assessing the new threat configuration. "Vincent Kovalev," the man introduced himself with a slight nod. "My associates have been somewhat overzealous in their business negotiations in this neighborhood." "Your associates are currently unconscious," Sarah replied, her voice professionally neutral. "And you're trespassing in a closed establishment." Kovalev smiled, seemingly unbothered by the weapon in Sarah's hand. "Military police, Afghanistan. 3 tours if I'm not mistaken. Sergeant Sarah Jensen. Distinguished record." Sarah's expression remained impassive, but internally she reassessed the tactical situation. Kovalev had conducted background intelligence gathering. This operation had been specifically planned for her. "Your reputation in certain circles was quite impressive before you retired to raise your daughter." His emphasis on the word carried veiled threat. "Emma, isn't it? Staying with your parents out on Lakeside Drive." Sarah felt cold focus descend, the same combat clarity she'd experienced when her convoy had been ambushed outside Bagram. "That was your second mistake," she said quietly. "And the first?" Kovalev asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "Assuming I retired." Sarah moved before the last word left her lips, executing a tactical advance that caught even Kovalev's professional guards by surprise. What followed demonstrated why Sarah Jensen's unit had maintained the highest efficiency rating in detainee extraction operations for 3 consecutive tours. Each movement was precisely calculated: disarm, neutralize, secure, implemented with the methodical effectiveness that had once been her professional signature. Kovalev himself proved more capable than his men, blocking her initial strike and countering with practiced technique. Former military, Sarah assessed, recognizing the distinctive movement patterns of Russian combat systems. "I did my homework, Sergeant," he grunted, deflecting her follow-up strike. "Clearly not enough," Sarah replied, adjusting her tactical approach to counter his style. The engagement lasted 42 seconds. When it concluded, Kovalev lay secured with his own belt and zip ties. Sarah kept behind the counter, watching with grudging professional respect as she systematically secured his men. Security camera footage would later show Detective Rivera what Sarah already knew. The criminals had made a critical error in their tactical assessment. They had targeted what they perceived as a vulnerable single mother working at a diner. Instead, they had engaged a combat veteran who had never stopped being a warrior. She had simply found a new battlefield. As sirens approached in the distance, Sarah checked her phone. A new text from Emma: "Grandma made your favorite cookies for when you pick me up tomorrow." Sarah smiled slightly. Some things were worth protecting at all costs. And some lessons about underestimating single mothers were taught the hard way. Morning light filtered through the reinforced blind Sarah had installed 3 days ago. The diner looked normal to passing customers, but the former military police sergeant had transformed it into something else entirely. Something the Ramirez crew wasn't expecting. Sarah Jensen checked her watch. 0600 hours, old habits, as she conducted her 4th perimeter sweep of the morning. The security camera footage from 2 nights ago had made the local news. Her takedown of Ramirez's 3 enforcers had been clinical, efficient. Textbook close-quarters response to multiple armed assailants. The kind of thing she'd trained others to do during her 3rd deployment. "You really think they'll hit us here?" Mike asked, the diner owner's voice betraying his anxiety despite efforts to sound calm. Sarah continued her inspection of the newly installed door braces. "They don't have a choice now.
Ramirez lost face. In their hierarchy, that requires a response. She spoke with the measured certainty of someone who'd studied enemy patterns before. They'll come with at least 8 men. Probably tonight or tomorrow after closing. Through the front windows, Sarah spotted Detective Rivera's unmarked sedan pulling into the lot. Right on schedule. The detective had been skeptical initially, but the security footage had changed everything. "The captain approved our patrol adjustments," Rivera said the moment she entered, not bothering with greetings. 2 squad cars within 60 seconds. Tactical response within 5 minutes if we call it in. Sarah nodded, appreciating the professional efficiency. "They'll be monitoring police bands. We need to assume they know your response protocols." From her apron pocket, Sarah produced a small notebook filled with precise diagrams of the diner, surrounding streets, and approach vectors. The detective's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the work of a waitress. "Ramirez has 3 lieutenants," Rivera said, shifting to tactical assessment. "Martinez handles enforcement, Rodriguez runs distribution, Vasquez manages their legitimate businesses." "Martinez will lead this personally," Sarah responded, certainty in her voice. "His enforcers failed. He needs to restore credibility." She tapped the diagram where she'd marked potential entry points. "They'll divide into 3 teams: front entrance, kitchen door, and possibly through the storage room skylight." Mike looked between them, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "Jesus. Sarah, how do you know all this?" "Pattern recognition," she answered simply. 3 tours in Kandahar province teaches you how organizations respond when threatened." She didn't mention the classified operations, the high-value target extractions her MP unit had specialized in. Some things stayed buried. The bell above the door jingled as 2 men entered. James Cooper and Marcus Washington. Former Army Rangers. Now working private security. Sarah had served with Cooper during her second tour. "Dining room secure," Cooper reported. "The formal tone automatic even in civilian clothes. Installed the last sensors at the service entrance. Motion and heat detection, just like the old days." Sarah nodded, checking her watch again. The morning rush would start in 30 minutes. Sight lines are established. Communication channels secure. Marcus held up 3 encrypted phones. "Closed network, just like you asked. Police can't monitor, which means Ramirez can't either." He glanced at Detective Rivera. "No offense." "None taken," the detective replied. "I'm more interested in why a diner waitress has access to military-grade communication equipment." The room fell silent as Sarah unfolded a topographical map of the 4-block radius surrounding the diner. Red marks indicated known Ramirez surveillance positions. Blue highlighted potential response routes. "The why isn't important," Sarah said finally. "What matters is that Martinez will come with overwhelming force, expecting a civilian target. He needs to make an example of us." Her finger traced likely approach vectors. Standard urban intimidation pattern. They'll attempt to cut power first, then communications. Multiple entry points, shock and awe tactics. Cooper nodded in agreement. Classic street-level operation. These guys learn from someone with training. "Which is why we're preparing a tactical response," Sarah continued. "Detective Rivera provides official coverage. Cooper and Marcus handle perimeter security. Mike maintains civilian presence. I'll coordinate internal defense." The bell jingled again. Sarah's posture shifted imperceptibly as Emma entered with her grandmother. The transition from tactical commander to mother happened in an instant. "Mom!" Emma rushed forward, throwing her arms around Sarah. "Grandma showed me the news video. Those moves were incredible. Was that from your military training?" Sarah's expression softened momentarily as she hugged her daughter. "Something like that." Over Emma's shoulder, she exchanged glances with her mother. "She deserved to know," the older woman said quietly. "After the news coverage." Sarah nodded. Some secrets couldn't stay buried forever. "Emma, I need you to stay with Grandma for a few more days." "Because of those men? The ones who threatened you?" Emma's perception had always been sharp. "Are they coming back?" "Yes," Sarah answered honestly. She'd never lied to her daughter,
even when the truth was difficult. That's why I need you safe while I handle this. Emma studied her mother with newfound understanding. You're not just a waitress, are you? Those medals in your footlocker, the photos from overseas.
I was a military police officer, Sarah confirmed.
Specialized in high-risk security operations. And now you're protecting the diner. Emma's voice carried unexpected pride.
I'm protecting our home, Sarah corrected gently.
This diner, this community, it's where we rebuilt our life after my service ended. Cooper cleared his throat, professional courtesy giving the family moment space but reminding Sarah of the timetable. She squeezed Emma's shoulders once more before returning to tactical mode. Riley's team will establish observation posts here and here, Sarah continued, pointing to the map. Marcus, your surveillance package is operational? Full spectrum, he confirmed. Motion sensors, infrared, and sound detection. Same setup we ran in Mosul, modified for civilian application. Sarah moved to the kitchen, checking the newly reinforced door. The steel frame looked original to anyone not trained to spot defensive upgrades. The reinforced hinges and three-point locking system were invisible unless you knew what to look for. Remember, our objective is containment and neutralization, she told the assembled team. Ramirez's crew expects to intimidate civilians. Instead, they'll encounter a prepared defensive position with trained personnel.
Detective Rivera studied Sarah with newfound respect.
You're not what you seem, are you, Jensen? Sarah checked the silent alarm system one final time before answering.
None of us are, detective.
The difference is understanding when to reveal your true capabilities. Outside, regular customers began filling the parking lot, unaware that the friendly waitress who served their coffee had spent the early hours establishing defensive positions and coordination protocols. To them, Sarah Jensen was a hard-working single mother. To the Ramirez crew, she was about to become something else entirely, a tactical problem they weren't equipped to solve. Cooper's phone buzzed with an alert from their surveillance system. Movement at Ramirez's compound. 8 vehicles mobilizing. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Right on schedule. She turned to Rivera. Time to implement the next phase. Ramirez thinks he's hunting a waitress. Let's show him what happens when you target a combat veteran. The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah returned to her waitress duties, serving coffee with a smile that revealed nothing of the tactical operations she'd set in motion. Beneath the surface of normalcy, a strategic response was unfolding, one the Ramirez crew would never see coming until it was too late. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows across Mabel's diner as Sarah Jensen completed her final security walkthrough. 24 hours had passed since her confrontation with Reeves' lieutenants, and her combat instincts told her their response would come at first light, tactical advantage with minimal civilian presence. She checked her watch. 5:17 a.m. Perimeter sensors are active, Detective Morris confirmed through her earpiece. His unmarked vehicle position 3 blocks east. We've got eyes on 2 SUVs approaching from the south, moving tactical. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically, her mind shifting to the operational awareness that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours. Copy that. Maintain distance. Let them commit to the approach. Her voice carried the calm precision of someone who had faced worse odds in Kandahar. Inside the diner, Mr. Grayson, the 68-year-old owner, checked the reinforced back door one final time. The former Army engineer had spent 2 days helping Sarah implement security measures that transformed the humble eatery into a defensible position. East entrance secure, he reported with military efficiency that belied his age. Sarah moved to the front counter, checking the positioning of the tables they'd subtly rearranged to create choke points. Nothing obvious to the untrained eye, but enough to control movement patterns within the space. Through the windows, she spotted the black SUVs slowing as they approached, confirming her tactical assessment. They're stopping 50 meters out, Morris warned. I count 8 individuals, professional formation, concealed weapons visible under jackets. These aren't street thugs, Sarah. Reeves brought in professionals, she acknowledged, recognizing the approach pattern from her military police training. 2x2 advance, standard intimidation protocol. Sarah removed her waitress apron, revealing the fitted tactical vest underneath, lightweight and discreet, but capable of stopping standard ammunition. Alpha team dismounting, Morris continued, maintaining his surveillance. 4 operators advancing toward main entrance. Staggered approach. Bravo team circling toward rear access point. Sarah checked the reinforced service counter, confirming the positioning of the non-lethal countermeasures she'd prepared. Her hand brushed against the military-grade tactical baton, a gift from her former unit commander, secured to her thigh. Mr. Grayson, maintain position in the kitchen. Remember the protocol, safety first. The older man nodded, moving toward his designated position. Though not combat-trained, his engineering experience had proven invaluable in reinforcing key structural points throughout the diner. The lead operators reached the entrance, their movements betraying professional training. The door chimes sounded as they entered, moving with practiced precision into what they believed was a simple diner. Sarah remained behind the counter, her posture relaxed but balanced, weight distributed evenly, ready to move in any direction.
"Morning, gentlemen," she greeted, her voice steady.
"We don't open for another 30 minutes.
The lead man, European descent, approximately 6 feet 2 inches, 220 pounds, former military bearing, scanned the room with practiced efficiency.
"We're not here for breakfast." His accent carried Eastern European inflections, confirming Sarah's assessment. Contracted professionals, likely ex-military. "Victor Reeves sends his regards," the second operator added, moving to flank left while the first maintained center position. The third and fourth men sealed the entrance. Standard containment protocol. Through her earpiece, Morris provided critical intelligence. Bravo team breaching rear entrance.
2 more vehicles approaching from the north.
"Sarah, you've got additional hostiles inbound." Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, years of combat experience allowing her to process tactical information while presenting a calm exterior. "Mr. Reeves should have taken my warning more seriously." The lead operator smiled coldly. "That's why we're here. He found your warning disrespectful." His hand moved toward his jacket, but Sarah had already assessed his draw pattern from his shoulder positioning. "Last chance to walk away," she offered, shifting her weight imperceptibly to her forward foot. The sound of the rear door being breached echoed through the diner. Standard 2-point entry, exactly as she had anticipated. Sarah activated the prepositioned countermeasures with a subtle wrist movement to the switch beneath the counter. The kitchen erupted with a precisely calculated noise of shattering glass and clattering metal, the diversion package she prepared triggering on command. The momentary distraction, lasting only 1.5 seconds, was all she needed. Sarah moved with the fluid precision that had made her the top hand-to-hand combat instructor in her unit. The lead operator's weapon cleared his jacket just as her tactical baton connected with his wrist. The impact delivered at precisely the angle needed to trigger involuntary muscle release. The weapon clattered to the floor as Sarah continued her movement, using the operator's forward momentum against him. The second man recovered quickly, demonstrating his professional training, but Sarah had already adjusted her position. Her elbow strike connected with his solar plexus, controlled force designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. Military police training emphasized subject control over elimination. "2 down in the main area," she sub-vocalized for Morris's benefit, already repositioning for the next threat. The third and fourth operators moved with coordinated precision, but they were reacting to a situation they hadn't prepared for. Sarah had spent 3 days visualizing this exact scenario, running mental repetitions of every possible variable. This wasn't her first time being outnumbered by professionals. "Bravo team neutralized in the kitchen," Mr. Grayson reported through her earpiece. The simple counter-ambush they'd prepared, a reinforced steel prep table strategically positioned to create a narrow passage, had functioned exactly as designed. Outside, police sirens began to wail, Morris's tactical response team moving in as planned. The remaining operators recognized the rapidly deteriorating tactical situation, but pride kept them committed to their objective. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," the third man snarled, drawing a combat knife with practiced efficiency. His grip and stance revealed specialized training. "I was about to say the same to you," Sarah replied, her voice calm as she shifted to the appropriate defensive position. The knife wielder advanced with professional technique, not street fighting but military close-quarters combat methodology. Sarah recognized the pattern immediately. Standard European Special Forces blade work. She had trained against this exact approach during joint exercises with NATO forces. Her counter-move came from muscle memory, a precisely timed deflection followed by a joint manipulation that leveraged mechanical advantage against anatomical weakness. The knife clattered to the floor as the operator found himself immobilized in a control position that Sarah could maintain with minimal exertion. "Stay down," she commanded, applying precisely enough pressure to emphasize her point without causing unnecessary injury. The fourth operator assessed his deteriorating tactical advantage and made the professional decision to withdraw, only to find Detective Morris and two tactical officers covering the entrance, weapons drawn. "Police! On the ground now!" Through her earpiece, Sarah heard confirmation that the reinforcement vehicles had been intercepted by state police units, positioned based on her tactical assessment. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 90 seconds. As Morris secured the subdued operators, Sarah maintained her professional composure, the combat focus that had defined her military career still evident in her controlled breathing and situational awareness. "You okay?" Morris asked, securing the last suspect. Sarah nodded, already running a mental after-action review. Textbook response. These were professionals, but they underestimated their opposition. She gestured toward the lead operator, now secured with police restraints. Former military, Eastern European, probably Bulgarian based on his tactical approach. Contracted, not directly affiliated with Reeves' organization. Morris raised an eyebrow. "You got all that during a fight?" "It wasn't a fight," Sarah corrected, her military precision showing through. It was a tactical response to a predetermined threat scenario. She began checking the diner for collateral damage, her movements methodical and efficient. Outside, morning light now fully illuminated Mabel's diner as police vehicles secured the perimeter. Local residents gathered at a safe distance, witnessing the aftermath of what would become a watershed moment for their community. Sarah's phone vibrated, a text from her daughter confirming her safety at her grandparents' home. One battle won, but Sarah maintained her tactical awareness. Professionals like these didn't work in isolation. Victor Reeves had resources, connections. "We need to secure Reeves immediately," she told Morris, already thinking 3 steps ahead. These were just his instruments. The real threat remains in play. Morris nodded, recognizing the validity of her assessment. "Tactical team is moving on his location now." Sarah checked her watch. 5:43 a.m. 26 minutes from first contact to resolution. Better than her projected timeline, but the operation wasn't complete until all threats were neutralized. Mr. Grayson emerged from the kitchen, surveying the controlled scene with a calm appreciation of someone who understood the precision of well-executed tactical operations. "Looks like we'll be opening a little late today," he observed with remarkable composure. For the first time that morning, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I think our customers will understand." Morning light streamed through the newly installed windows of Riley's diner, casting golden patterns across freshly polished countertops. Sarah Jensen moved with practiced efficiency, her movements economical as she prepared for the day's first customers. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation that changed everything in Westbrook, but Sarah's situational awareness remained razor-sharp, a habit ingrained through years of military training and combat deployments. "Mom, delivery guys are here with the new chairs," Emma called from the storeroom, her voice carrying the confidence that had blossomed since witnessing her mother's transformation from unassuming waitress to community protector. Sarah acknowledged with a nod, her eyes performing another automatic sweep of the street outside before moving toward the back. The new security cameras tracked her movement, their presence a reminder of how much had changed. Detective Rivera had personally helped install them, part of the community's collective determination that what happened to Riley's diner would never happen again. "Where do you want these, Ms. Jensen?" The delivery man's respectful tone wasn't lost on Sarah. The same man who'd once barely acknowledged her existence now stood slightly straighter in her presence, his body language showing deference to someone whose combat capabilities had been displayed across local news channels. "Against the far wall for now. We'll arrange them after the morning rush." Sarah signed the delivery form, her peripheral vision automatically noting the man's position, the exits, the street activity outside. Old habits from Baghdad and Kandahar that once seemed out of place in small-town America now felt appropriate, even necessary. The bell above the door chimed as Bill Riley himself entered, the diner's owner moving with newfound energy despite the cane that helped support his still-healing leg. The gunshot wound he'd received during the confrontation had become, in his words, a small price to pay for the rebirth of this place. "Morning, Sarah. Emma." He nodded to them both, pride evident in his expression. "Place looks better than it has in 20 years. Community did most of the work,"
Sarah reminded him, though she'd personally coordinated the renovation efforts, applying the same tactical precision to reconstruction that she'd once used for military operations.
Community wouldn't have had a place to save if not for you, Bill countered, settling into what had become his regular booth.
Newspaper says they're sentencing Marcos tomorrow.
Rivera thinks he'll get at least 15 years. Sarah nodded but didn't comment further.
Ernesto Marcos, the criminal organization's lieutenant who'd coordinated the attack on the diner, was just one piece of a larger operation that had crumbled in the aftermath of that night. The statewide investigation triggered by the evidence secured during the confrontation had led to 37 arrests across 3 counties. The criminal network that had terrorized local businesses for years had been systematically dismantled, much like the insurgent cell Sarah had helped neutralize during her final deployment to Afghanistan. The morning progressed with its new rhythm as regular customers began filling the diner.
Sarah noted how they unconsciously positioned themselves throughout the space, no longer clustering away from the windows as they had in the weeks immediately following the attack. The fear was receding, replaced by a community-wide resilience that she recognized from war zones where civilians refused to be terrorized.
Ms. Jensen. A hesitant voice caught Sarah's attention as she delivered coffee to a corner booth.
She turned to face Tyler Matthews, a local high school teacher whose hands still showed fading defensive wounds from the night he'd unexpectedly joined the fight, grabbing a fallen chair to protect an elderly couple when the criminals had burst through the front door. The students finished that security assessment you suggested for their civics project. He offered a folder. Thought you might want to review their findings before we present to the town council. Sarah accepted the folder, recognizing another step in the community's transformation. What had begun as her tactical response to immediate danger had evolved into something more sustained. The high school students' project analyzing local business security would lead to community-wide improvements that would make Westbrook resistant to criminal intrusion for years to come.
I'll review it tonight, she promised, knowing Emma would be interested as well.
Her daughter had developed a remarkable eye for security vulnerabilities, a skill Sarah had mixed feelings about.
Pride in Emma's capabilities balanced against sadness that such knowledge was necessary in her young life.
The diner's new phone rang from behind the counter. Emma answered it, her practiced response another sign of her maturation.
"Mom, it's Sergeant Ramirez," she called out, using the proper rank without prompting.
Sarah took the phone, exchanging brief greetings with her former commanding officer who'd provided critical support during the worst of the crisis. His military connections had helped identify the criminal organization's leadership structure, information that was now proving valuable to federal prosecutors.
"Just checking in," Ramirez said, his tone professional but warm.
"Heard the community center program starts today." 1,400 hours, Sarah confirmed, using military time without thinking. The self-defense classes she'd agreed to teach at the community center had quickly expanded to include tactical awareness for local business owners. Starting with the basics: situational awareness, threat identification, de-escalation techniques.
"They couldn't ask for a better instructor," Ramirez affirmed.
"How's Emma handling everything?" Sarah's gaze found her daughter efficiently managing the register, confidently interacting with customers. "Stronger than I expected. School counselor says she's processing it all remarkably well." After finishing the call, Sarah moved through the diner, refilling coffee and taking orders with the same efficiency that had once made her an exemplary military police officer. The difference now was that she no longer hid her training. Her posture, her awareness, her confident movement through space all reflected her military background, no longer disguised beneath a carefully constructed civilian facade. The lunch rush began precisely at 11:30, the diner now consistently full as Westbrook residents made eating at Riley's a statement of community solidarity. Sarah coordinated the increased activity with tactical precision, directing the 2 new staff members Bill had hired with clear, concise instructions that reflected her command experience. Detective Rivera entered at 12:15, exactly when the department's lunch break began. His nod to Sarah communicated professional respect between 2 people who had seen combat, albeit on different front lines. He settled at the counter, accepting the coffee that appeared without him having to order it. "State Police finished their report this morning," he informed her quietly. "They're officially classifying it as a coordinated criminal enterprise takedown. Your name figures prominently." Sarah acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Any surveillance on the remaining associates?" "Nothing significant. Most have left the state. The few still around are keeping their heads down." Rivera studied her for a moment. "How are you sleeping?" The question wasn't casual.
It came from someone who understood the aftermath of violence, the way it played behind closed eyelids in the quiet hours of night.
Better, Sarah admitted. Emma still has occasional nightmares.
That'll fade with time, Rivera assured her, though they both knew some memories never completely disappeared.
They just became manageable, contained, like the combat experiences Sarah had compartmentalized for years. The afternoon brought a lull in business, allowing Sarah to accompany Emma outside where temporary barriers protected a newly established outdoor seating area. The expansion had been Bill's idea, a physical representation of the diner's refusal to contract in fear after the attack.
"Ms. Jensen," a woman called out, approaching with purpose. Sarah recognized her as the owner of the bookstore 3 blocks over.
"We've implemented those security protocols you suggested. Made a world of difference already." The delivery company actually commented on how professional our receiving process is now. Sarah nodded, accepting the gratitude with the same quiet professionalism she'd shown when receiving commendations for her military service. What had begun as her personal battle against criminals threatening her workplace had evolved into a community-wide security transformation that extended far beyond Riley's diner. As evening approached, Sarah observed Emma arranging flowers at each table, a touch of normalcy and beauty amidst the lingering evidence of conflict. The new reinforced door, the strategically positioned mirrors, the subtle security features throughout the diner, all necessary, but balanced now by signs of regular life continuing. Bill approached as Sarah finished updating the staff schedule for the following week.
"Still can't believe how this place has turned around," he said, genuine wonder in his voice. 3 weeks ago I was ready to sell, cut my losses before those criminals burned us to the ground."
"You held your position when it counted," Sarah reminded him, using battlefield terminology without thinking. Bill had indeed shown unexpected courage during the final confrontation, despite having no combat training. "Got shot for my troubles," he chuckled, rubbing his leg. "But worth every moment to see this place now. The heart of the community again." He paused, suddenly serious. The lawyer called. "Insurance company finally approved the full claim. There's a sizable bonus coming your way, Sarah. Combat pay, you might call it." Sarah began to demur, but Bill held up his hand. "Not negotiable. Might I suggest putting it toward that property on Maple Street you've been eyeing?" She couldn't hide her surprise. The small house with the fenced yard had indeed caught her attention during her security patrols of the neighborhood. A proper home for Emma, with space for a garden and security features Sarah could personally install. "Think about it," Bill urged. "This community needs you to put down roots." The diner's final customers of the day departed as Emma turned the sign to closed. Sarah moved through her closing routine, checking security systems with practiced efficiency while her daughter counted the register. The day's revenue was another indication of the diner's transformation, almost double their pre-incident averages. Outside, the evening patrol car slowed, Officer Chen giving a respectful nod through the window before continuing his route. The increased police presence was yet another positive outcome of the confrontation, with the department finally receiving the funding they'd requested for years. "Ready, Mom?" Emma asked, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked older somehow, standing straighter, her eyes carrying the awareness that came from seeing the world's dangers up close. "Almost," Sarah replied, completing one final security check before joining her daughter at the door. As they stepped outside, Sarah automatically scanned the street, the buildings, the shadows between parked cars. The threat had been neutralized, the criminals scattered, but vigilance remained her natural state. The difference now was that it no longer felt like a burden to be hidden. It was an acknowledged strength, recognized and valued by those around her. "Ms. Jensen," a young voice called out. Sarah turned to see Lily Parker, a high school junior who had signed up for the community center class. "Just wanted to say I'm looking forward to tomorrow's session. My mom's coming too." Sarah nodded, offering a small smile. 1,400 hours. Don't be late." As Lily hurried away, Emma looked up at her mother. "You know, you've started talking like a soldier again." "Have I?" Sarah asked, genuinely surprised. "It's okay," Emma assured her, slipping her hand into Sarah's as they began walking home. "I like it. It's who you really are." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced since before her last deployment. The carefully constructed walls between her military past and civilian present had crumbled, not in defeat but in integration. Westbrook had seen her true capabilities, and instead of rejection, they'd responded with acceptance, respect, even reliance. As they walked through streets that felt safer than they had in years, Sarah realized she was finally home in a way military veterans rarely experienced. Not hiding who she was. Not minimizing her skills. Not pretending the combat experiences that shaped her had never happened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The community center classes, Emma's science project, the ongoing security improvements throughout Westbrook. But for the first time since leaving the military, Sarah Jensen faced the future without the exhaustion of maintaining a false persona. The diner waitress and the combat veteran were finally the same person, her strength acknowledged, her skills valued, her past integrated with her present. The criminals who had targeted Riley's diner had indeed lived to regret learning about Sarah Jensen's combat background, not just because of their individual defeats and arrests, but because they had inadvertently helped create something stronger than before, a community united, vigilant, and resilient, led by a single mother who no longer needed to hide her true capabilities. Well, my friends, that's our story for today. I hope it brought a little joy to your afternoon. Don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free, and it helps make sure you never miss a new story. God bless, and I'll see you all next time.